Charles Whitaker watches what's happening in the United States. Charles Whitaker watches what's happening in the UK. Charles Whitaker watches what's happening in Portugal and Venezuela and Australia and the Caribbean. You get the picture here. He is watching a lot. And he knows that agriculture in all those places is both similar and different. Hi, I'm Dave Price. Charles is the managing partner at Brown&Co in the UK. He has been a leader there for more than 3 decades. He works with farm families and investors. This week, we ask him about how those two can coexist successfully. We ask what is working well in the UK and what is not right now. And the best part of this week's conversation is that we get to have it in person with Charles in Iowa. We welcome in Charles Whitaker from Brown&Co. Hello, sir.
Good afternoon to you.
Nice to see you in person.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about what you do and your background before we get into the deep stuff. How did you get to where you are?
Okay. That's an interesting question. Yeah. How long have we got?
You know, here in the States, we're very nosy.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there's nothing to hide that I'm aware of anyway. So, farming family in Lincolnshire. Grew up on the farm. Went to school as everybody else did. Went to ag college. Got an ag degree. Worked on a neighbouring farm for a couple of years. Got approached by somebody who was in real estate and agriculture. He was responsible, I guess, for the management of the farm that I was on at the time. And I decided to join him, really, as a sort of green graduate in ag consultancy, farm management. And that was really starting farm management in the mid-'80s, late 80s, to what was otherwise brokerage business only, really, and landlord-tenant stuff. We did a management buyout in 1993 from that organisation, which was owned by Royal Life Insurance. 11 others and myself, and we're now a business of 330-odd staff, 40 partners, doing ag, where we can do it and get paid and hopefully deliver a service for long-standing customers involved in farming.
What is it about this aspect of the industry that keeps you? You've mentioned this, that you've done this for a couple of decades now. Why this merging of ag and real estate? What is that connection that intrigues you?
Well, for me, it's business, really. It's business of farming. Passionate about farming and outdoors and growing stuff and livestock, and always have been. So that's my driver, I suppose. And we've managed to find a niche that, at the time, was relatively unserviced, I think, bringing an external influence on management to family farm businesses. That's how we started, really. It's grown way beyond that now, but that's how it all started. And it keeps changing. You know, we've had the opportunities to open an office in Poland, which we did shortly after things changed in Poland in the 90s. It was exciting and different. And some of our UK client business wanted us to go and help them there start farming businesses in that region. South America in the mid-2000s, an opportunity to go there. Again, clients take us to these places really to help them with their businesses. And it just keeps moving forward and changing. And I guess that's why it's kept me at it for 35 years now.
Brown&Co, part of the International Ag Alliance. What does that alliance mean to you? Why be part of this?
We've done a bit of, I in particular have done a lot of overseas work in my time and taken Brown&Co to lots of places. Some places I prefer not to go probably, but we've been there anyway. And got paid and survived and all that sort of stuff. And I think, so we've always had that gene, I suppose, with us a little bit. That brought us into contact with LAWD, who are the International Ag Alliance partner in Australia. Ed and I both did some work in Australia 7 or 8 years ago and met some of those guys. And I think People's Company wanted to broaden their reach, I think, as far as potential footprints for investment and parties to work with who know the land market in those geographies and know land management rules and regs and all the things that go with that. And so it's just felt a natural fit. So People's Company asked and we said yes, really. And it's an alliance. It's not a business partnership per se, but its objectives are really to grow all our respective businesses, a common theme.
I'm fascinated by how you look at trends in the industry based on your background, because you come from a farming family while you professionally also deal with the institutional investor. So those can be, that can be some tension, right? You have some who don't want to see that outside outside involvement, and you have others who really see the strength of that and, pushing toward the future.
Sure.
How do you view that?
Well, of course, been through many cycles in that period over the last 35
Yeah.
years. And institutional investment in the land market in the UK was a big thing in the 70s and 80s, just as I was getting started, really. Very big in terms of landlord-tenant legislation, all sorts of other aspects of the land market which influenced people's decision to engage in that or not. And a lot of that was driven by hard economics in the 80s and late 70s. So institutions would buy farmland, leave tenants in place, give them long-term tenures. That was good for the farmer. He didn't go bust because he'd run out of money. He got his capital out and he could carry on farming. I think we might see some of that coming back. We've got a few problems in the UK at the moment in the ag sector and many other sectors, but just cope with ag today. And so I think, yes, it's about that balance, really. We've got around the world, we just work in the Eastern Caribbean where it's all about this is my land, we don't want the white man coming here taking it from us and all that sort of stuff. So I think, you have to approach all these things sensitively and sensibly, and you've got to find a fair balance. The relationship has to be fair. When it's not fair, it doesn't work. We've all seen lots of examples of that over the years. But as time has gone on, I think the industry's become more sophisticated, the numbers have got bigger, and you'll know from talking to People's Company and other folk here, I mean, the requirement actually for patient capital in the sector, wherever we are around the world, is big, because it doesn't exist in the farming families anymore. And as we aggregate farms to get better scale, better economics, and we run out of children because they're off doing something more interesting or perhaps just different because that's what they want to do.
Or easier.
Or easier way to make a living, yeah. So I think, we're very much wedded to the thought process that we need some of that external capital. We're just in different jurisdictions. We just need to find the right balance to it, really, and how it works with the farmers.
Can the little guy make it?
Yeah, depends which market we're talking about, but certainly in our market, most of our clients are actually private farming families and businesses. We have some institutional business, but the majority is private client work, really. And one of the attractions to us about People's Company and their relationship is trying to get some better connection with some of that bigger picture capital, really, both in our market in the UK, Eastern Europe and South America as well. But I think the little guy can make it, yeah. And there's lots of niche industries and sectors around agriculture, not for everybody, and difficult if you're competing with mainstream retailers and such like. But lots of people have set up businesses and made that work. So I think there is scope for that, yeah. And we've got lots of diversified enterprises. It's not about necessarily producing crops or foods at scale, but doing things niche, really, tourism, dog walking paddocks, all the rage at the moment with us post-COVID. All sorts of stuff, really. Holiday businesses and eco-pods and woodland and that sort of thing.
Crop-wise, what's working? What's doing well?
None of the cereals in our market, same as here at the moment. Wheat, barley, oilseed rape, peas, beans, all terrible, really. Margins are borderline negative. Sugar's down on its knees as well. I mean, our fresh produce and root crop business has generally been pretty good over the last 3 years, really, since COVID was a mess of that, and it was also made a big mess of when energy prices, the Ukraine war, that caused big problems with people that were using a lot of energy in farming, particularly with our electricity prices. But now we've shorted that supply, so we've got the retailers in a bit better of a balance now. So I think generally fresh produce producers have done pretty well over the last 3 years in the UK.
Since we've been talking, I think I've heard you mention the UK, the States, Portugal, Australia, the Caribbean. So you get around, and I'm curious the similarities and differences you find in these different countries when it comes to agriculture.
Small island agriculture, completely different. I would say Eastern Caribbean, where a lot of their trading relationships have gone, perhaps with UK and then into the EU, etc., through the ACP arrangement. And so I think agriculture in those regions has been very tough, Eastern Caribbean. But food price inflation has been a big thing, and suddenly we've got governments starting to think about, hey, do we really want to be importing all this food? How do we encourage people to go back to the land? And in those geographies in particular, that's tough because the whole educational process. People think farming is the last thing they want to do or should be doing for their kids. So that's slightly different, I suppose, in the sort of larger economies in Eastern Europe in particular. Land title, land tenure, being able to own and control your business, I think very important for farmers. I mean, nobody likes being, shoved in the ribs and told to get out of the way because they're coming through with a new highway or
right.
somebody bigger is coming and getting them out of the way. So
Sure.
I think that's common everywhere, really. People have a feel for the land and affinity with the land. I think the pressure on income or net income of farming is, with the inflation we've had the last 7 or 8 years, is everywhere. And it's severe, really. we've lost all our support in the UK over the last couple of years of new government and leaving the EU. And so suddenly we're all exposed to that, and that's causing people to think a little bit about, we wanted to build this big farm business, which now doesn't make us any money and maybe loses us some money with a fair bit of risk. So I think we shall see a few changes to mindset there, but common throughout, really. Production, looking after land, looking after livestock well, doing the job as well as they can, and hopefully moving forward. I mean, that's a common interest for farmers that we deal with all over the world, really.
I skimmed through a report that came out late in 2025 talking about what to me seemed like a fairly high percentage of folks who did not expect to make an income. And I'm curious how you view looking ahead in 2026. Is that still the expectation that a lot of folks will struggle?
In what I would call the developed markets, and obviously people's company are much more accustomed to the markets here, but yeah, margins here are not very big or negative. Same with us in the UK. I think we expect that to go on for a couple of seasons, I'm afraid, because this whole adequate supply of commandable crops, grains, is just causing the market to be very painful. And we would have been getting, in our market, we're getting £160 a tonne for wheat probably today. We were getting that, 8, 9, 10 years ago, and the cost of production have doubled. So yeah, I think the expectation is we're not going to make any money, and now the focus is, okay, how do we stay in business without losing our shirts, really, over the next couple of years of difficulty. And I have listened to quite a lot of stuff going on at this conference, very dependent on support. And maybe that'll keep everybody going in the right direction as long as the seasons are good and the price doesn't fall further. But yeah, I think we've got quite a lot of risk in the sector and very little reward for the next couple of years.
And because of that, do you have more folks looking to get out? We already, and I wasn't trying to be flippant about it, but as, I would think as some younger people are looking through the struggles that mom and dad, grandma and grandpa experienced for years, they might be thinking, this is not for me.
Yeah.
Are you seeing some of these families thinking it may be time, or is it more kind of standing pat?
I think we've seen that process continue, and I would say probably accelerate over the last 20 or 30 years in ag, whether you're in the US or whether we're in Europe. As you say, other professionals and professional opportunities and avenues that maybe easy in agriculture have come up, and people have gone and done that. So we've been short of successes, I would say, generally, which is why we've got the supply of land to the market and why we need patient capital to buy it, or the neighbour to buy it. Will it accelerate that? I'm not sure. I think those in the sector now are used to some pretty tough times, and I think deciding are we going to stay in this sector or are we at retirement age? In which case, where's the next purchaser that's going to come and take this land from me? Or we've got the added complication at the moment. We've just changed our inheritance tax legislation, so we've got limited relief on farmland, having had full relief on farmland. So that's also caused people, and I think I believe that will be a driver for people to say, this is hard work, we haven't got any cash, we're not making any money, we're going to pay tax anyway, so why don't we sell it, or sell some of it? And I think that will be a driver probably.
One of the things in the States, maybe more people talking about the competition from Brazil, especially, let's just talk about soybeans.
Yeah.
And pretty tough for somebody in the United States dealing with a competitor in Brazil with 2 growing seasons when you can only do it once in the States. Talk about internationally. So the competition internationally, what are you all dealing with?
Well, and this is a problem for us all, really. Whether we like to admit it or not, our cost of production, and I refer to it as a developed world, where we're paying £200,000 for a 200 horsepower tractor, and we're paying a driver £50,000. Is not the same when we're in the undeveloped world.
For
It's
sure.
a fact, isn't it? Let alone the climate of the soil advantages. I'm not particularly familiar with Brazil economics, but we're heavily involved in Argentina and Paraguay. And we think our production costs there are half what they are in the developed world.
Which is hard. That's hard to compete with.
Hard to compete with. It's not a walk in the park, obviously. There's lots of other risks and issues in terms of tax, in terms of foreign currency control, certainly in the case of Argentina, storage costs, shipping costs, etc. But the fundamentals are, you can't argue with them, really. So the question is, are we going to have trade that restricts that access to the market? Or are we going to see some of our more marginal land, and I think that's what we'll see in the UK, I'm quite sure, where we can't get adequate yields out of rotations, maybe doing something else, or not being farmed possibly, which would be heresy for anybody to think of the last 20 or 30 years. But I can see if you've got negative production economics, why are we doing it? So yes, I think increasing competition, let's say, rather than threat to the market from some of these lower cost producers where it's fundamentally lower cost, but the operating costs, input costs might be the same, land prices 10 or 20% of developed markets, I think will have a growing influence over time.
What's the public demand right now? What are they demanding from the politicians?
A better environment would be the strong focus in, and with all governments of all shades over the last 10 years, I think probably in the UK, we've had heavy environmental pressure really to regulate farming, regulate land use, regulate, obviously, returning manures or emissions to the air and water and soil, quite rightly. I haven't got a problem with that. The problem we do have is we still face competition from imports that don't have those same production controls. Mm-hmm. But I think, again, in the developed world, I don't see that changing. I think we're just going to have more and more regulation and have to have a lighter footprint in our production capability. And that adds cost because we influence our output levels for the same amount of input. So I think that's going to be more of the same. And that's really what we've been up against really in the UK for the last 10 years, I would say. It's been an ongoing sort of roller coaster really of increased environmental protection and legislation. And it's coming here too, isn't it? Mm-hmm. In terms of what we do with large poultry farms, pig farms, dairy farms, etc. How do we handle the manures? How do we handle the emissions? Ammonia scrubbers on poultry units, for example. I don't think the industry, certainly in Europe, has got its head around yet how we make organic manures out of animal manures effectively so that we can still utilise that on the land as a crop nutrient, because at the moment we're legislating against using that on the land in favour of synthetic fertilisers, which seems rather daft really, but yeah.
Not to be Debbie Downer here, but okay, so the factors you lay out there, higher production cost and any kind of commitment to environmental protection and possibly even improvement, how is that not insurmountable challenge when you're looking at these underdeveloped or undercommitted countries that don't have those? I mean, how do you overcome that when you're looking longer term?
Well, I suppose that we're talking about a policymaker or a farmer or a consumer, but I think over time those environmental protection methods in developing countries are going to get greater and are going to improve. And I think, well, there's recent talk about Mercosur access to the EU market. There's going to have to be production controls and standards and welfare standards, otherwise that product can't come in. So I think, and that's been going on for some time, I think more of that will happen. And if countries can't comply or don't wish to comply, then they won't get into those markets. I see that as being increasing regulation really to differentiate from those products in the markets that we produce for and where we've got more discerning consumers and where that's important.
How optimistic or pessimistic are you for the rest of this year? Are you by nature an optimistic fellow or not?
I would say by nature I'm cautious, probably. Yeah.
Aren't you all that way?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
I have the stereotype of all the folks in the UK. They're just very measured to me.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, they're not quite as adventurous as some of the.
I didn't want to say not adventurous, but it just seemed, as my kids would say, chill.
No, I think from a. Well, let's just go back to agriculture. Crop production, agriculture, and cereals and dry commodities is in a hard place at the moment, and I'm not optimistic about that. I think we've got to batten down the hatches and get through without losing our shirts, as I said earlier. Flip side to that, look at all livestock sectors, certainly with us in our market, they're booming. Mm-hmm. A complete reversal of the last decade or 2 decades, I would say. And so actually, if people have got diversification, maybe they can attract, in our case, we have a lot of outdoor pig units on the land, and if you attract pig units to their farms, they get some income from that, or maybe even JV with those people, then they can marry up the income streams a bit better, rather than just being straightforward arable or cereal producers. So I think it would be wrong to say it's across all sectors, and that's why the land market, in our market anyway, has some defensive mechanisms, because if you've got neighbours who are making good money out of poultry or dairy or anaerobic digestion, they're keen to buy that and they're making plenty of money. It's just the broadacre cereal sector that's in trouble at the moment, really.
So for the folks who are reaching out to you who are interested in buying farmland, who are they? primarily?
Well, primarily it would be farmers buying farmland, perhaps
Expanding,
that have
maybe their neighbor.
sold land for development.
Okay.
Maybe, or maybe they've got one of these income streams. Perhaps they're big and strong in vegetables, and they've got water resources they can push through the hedge onto neighbouring ground, so they wouldn't often miss an opportunity to buy a neighbouring farm. If you've got farmers that are in poultry right now, or anaerobic digestion, or pigs, they're making a lot of money, and so they're keen to expand their base. If we've got farmers who've sold land for development, for housing, or redeveloped a farmyard, they want to roll that money over, get tax relief on the rollover, and buy and expand their footprint. So, and also we have had, and still do have, I think, those that are wealthy in their own right and they want to purchase land and a home in the countryside, and that's quite a big driver in various regions of the UK as well, and always has been. I think always will be, whatever the inheritance tax legislation is. So a mixture.
I'd like to close out with, since we get the opportunity to talk to you here in the United States, I presume you've been here multiple times.
I have been. I've only been to Iowa 3 times, but I've been to the US multiple times, yeah. And
Outstanding.
driven across it and up and down it and looked at farmland and all sorts of nooks and crannies, yeah.
What's your view of the United States?
Well, that might have changed over the last 12 months, I would say, yeah.
A little different dynamic, probably.
Yeah. We've been involved in Ukraine, heavily involved in Poland. We're not in Ukraine anymore for obvious reasons. I think, well, I think let's row back a little bit from this year. I think generally my view of the United States is go ahead, pro-business, great attitude to risk compared with, as you alluded to earlier, with the Brits generally and business generally. And you see that in farmers and everything here, really, in the sectors I know about. So that's great. I think politically at the moment, from our side of the pond, it looks quite challenging, really, in terms of how we're going to stop this sort of onward march of Russia in Eastern Europe, which is considered a pretty serious threat, I think, for including in the UK, but definitely in Eastern Europe. And the sort of tearing up almost of allegiances that we've had in trade and all sorts of other things over the years, I think, is difficult to see coming from UK at the moment. But, you know, we'll see how things progress, no doubt.
Thank you. Appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Charles Whitaker of Brown&Co. Now, Brown&Co has released insights and analysis for what's been happening in UK farmland across the various industries, and you can find that. It's part of our profile piece about Charles. See it now at AmericanFarmlandowner.com. It is the place where landowners get their news. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast, and thanks for caring about the future of our farmland.